Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're here live at the World Trade Center in Seattle. We're going to be talking about everything that is edibles today. It's day one at HempFest. I've got some amazing guests, starting with Dan Devlin of Zoots. Dan is a co-founder of Zoots, maker of a handcrafted small batch treat made with premium infused cannabis paired with unique blends tailored to your interests, desires, and intentions. Their zootologists carefully extract the essential oil of the cannabis plant in a contaminant-free environment using their proprietary cypress extraction method. The closed-loop process captures THC using organic cane alcohol and a cold fusion process, so you can be assured that each serving is consistent. And while everyone experiences cannabis individually, Zoots is about having a good time without feeling uncomfortably stoned, which is what sets Zoots apart as a purveyor of fine cannabis edibles. And Zoots was recently acquired by Washington-based Ionic Brands for a total of $11.6 million. Ionic, with a market cap of about $16.5 million, trades on the Canadian Securities Exchange as IONC and on the over-the-counter OTC markets as IONKF. Dan, thanks for being here.
You bet. Glad to be.
Remotely with us is Bob Eschino with Incredibles. Bob is co-founder and president of Medically Correct, whose trusted brand, Incredibles, is known for having the most consistent and award-winning infused products in the cannabis industry. Bob is responsible for the company's sales, marketing, and national expansion. As founding member of the Edibles Council through Cannabis Business Alliance, the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, and the Colorado Cannabis Manufacturers Association, Bob has helped shape the next wave of cannabis rules and regulations for the cannabis industry federal level. Medically Correct prides itself on helping educate the public about responsible edible consumption and the emerging cannabis industry. Bob, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And also remotely is Patrick Ian Moore of Edible Magazine. Patrick's the editor-in-chief of Edibles Magazine and the chief operations officer of Edibles List Manufacturing and Distribution. He started out as head dispatch at Speedweed and went from there to be working as a product development and marketing specialist at W Vapes. The edibleslist.com is a source for information and reviews on medical marijuana edibles, dispensaries, doctors, and all else in the legal cannabis community. Edibles Magazine is a source for credible and relevant news with everything related to the cannabis industry. Their mission is to help medical marijuana patients locate smokeless medication alternatives. They want to help get the medicine in the hands of the patients they need it. They connect patients, vendors, and dispensaries, and patients can now save time and money locating their favorite edibles and new consumable products while being able to rate and review, adding their valued option to our online community. Staying tuned for their best of Edibles List awards, and stay tuned for the topicals, tinctures, and other awards that they have. So Patrick Ian Moore, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much.
So this first question is going out to you, Patrick, asking about how the FDA's ruling on Curaleaf making claims impacts the CBD and THC labeling rules, as well as potential capital flow. And the reason why I asked that is because according to the cannabis data from BDS Analytics, edibles are the industry's fastest growing segment alongside concentrates. California, the nation's leading weed market, saw 108% growth in edible sales this year, jumping from 18 million in January to 37.5 million in August. So another data firm, Brightfield Group, projects that cannabis edibles will rake in $2.3 billion by the end of next year, 2020. So America's edibles may net $5.3 billion, putting the infused foodie sector on par with the K-pop and zombie industries or Richard Branson's net worth. So Patrick, how does the FDA's ruling on Curaleaf making claims impact CBD and THC labeling rules as well as potential capital flow?
Well, for CBD especially, and that brand in particular, because they're the CVS brand, where a lot of, let's say, independently owned smoke shops, a lot of small chain smoke shops, or even CBD wellness stores, hemp stores, anything like that, are willing to take a lot of risks. But with a chain like CVS, which is huge, it's corporate, it's nationwide, there's only so much that they're going to risk now that this has come down. And we've been seeing the FDA issue these letters about making claims, not only to Curaleaf, but to a lot of brands that are making what they're calling egregious claims, because you really can't say that it cures anything. It's completely illegal. That's not anything that the FDA has approved. It's not been designated as an actual drug the way that THC has. So because it's not a drug, according to the FDA, because you can't make egregious claims about what it does or what it heals or what it cures, you really shouldn't be calling it CBD to begin with, because that's what all the trouble is about. And I mean, the farm bill that passed recently was only for hemp. The farm bill didn't really mean that we get to do anything differently with CBD. So unless it's a place, now California is different because they have specifically said, the state has specifically said that you cannot put CBD in food. Somewhere like Florida or New York, they're looking to make legislation that's a lot more CBD friendly than we've even talked about here. But somewhere like Utah, you can, if you have a license specifically for that. But even if you do, they have weird rules of their own. For instance, that it can't be in a gummy, but it can be in other kinds of food. So it is a really big part of the equation that Curaleaf was singled out by the FDA because they're so big, because they are traded the way that they are, because that they have the shareholders that they do. But it really goes a lot deeper and a lot bigger when you look at how it affects everything from state to state and product to product. I don't know that in particular instance is really affecting the way that THC gets labeled, because that is such a state-specific thing, and it's not something that's even trickling down to us yet as far as California goes. But because you can't sell hemp-derived CBD product next to THC in a California dispensary, it does continue to affect it in that way. So it also means that you can't, what they're calling adulterate THC product with hemp-based CBD. You can't just combine the two if you happen to have isolate and distillate. And part of that's going to get into labeling and regulation of the CBD. So if you do that now, it's still got to be full spectrum. That's mostly what we're here in Los Angeles seeing as the results of the Curaleaf ruling by the FDA. That helps any?
Yeah. Bob, what do you think? Do you think that's going to limit some cash flow, some capital?
Cash flow and capital is the hardest thing to come by in the industry, period. It's always been difficult. I don't know if it's going to get more difficult because of that ruling. I just step back and, I kind of shake my head, right? We've been battling this for 10 years. You're not supposed to make any claims, whether it's THC, CBD, any of the cannabinoids. We've known this for years. It's been beat into our heads here in Colorado, right? So it's just commonplace to us. So to hear that people are still doing that, and especially on such a grand scale, is it's a little shocking, right? I mean, from both sides, right? From CVS and from the manufacturer's side, they should have known. Legal should have pointed out, or compliance should have pointed out long before it hit the shelves, that they shouldn't have been making any health claims.
All right, Dan. So I was going to ask you about generally recognized as safe products and increasing quality of some of these products, with Canada becoming legal with edibles on October 17th of this year. Or mid-December, actually, it got bumped out. So I've consistently seen emerging markets release beverage emulsions with a ring, an oil ring formation at the top of the bottle, which could result in consumers imbibing large quantities of the active ingredient, producing what could be a series of negative outcomes. And we've seen billboards that read "mold to gold," offering to buy moldy cannabis for the purpose of converting it into a byproduct, a derivative for edibles. And so, Dan, what's being done to increase the quality of products to make them generally recognized as safe and recognized industry-wide as a quality, stable, and safe product?
Well, I guess number one is the quality manufacturing. In many states, at least in Washington, I know in Colorado, we've been there, they call for full homogenization. You've got to prove that, so you're not going to get the ring that you're talking about. Obviously, if something sits for a year, sometimes that sneaks in on you. But I think really the main element here is that most good companies, in fact, all companies should, but I know most good companies operate under basically what are considered FDA guidelines. which is the Food and Drug Cleanliness, which all food companies operate under. It's not required because our industry is not federally regulated. In fact, we're felons. So, but that's the way it's going to be. And quite frankly, edibles in all the states that we're in, and we're in 4 or 5 states, are highly tested, highly regulated as to dosage, and really, quite frankly, I think represent the safest cannabis products on the market because you know exactly what you're getting. You know that the dosage that you're taking is correct, and you can then control your intake. So I think the consumers will recognize that. I think the industry needs to push that more because we are by far the most highly tested and highly regulated part of the cannabis industry.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was going to be able to go a whole week without being called a felon.
Sorry, Bob.
That's all right.
So the number one investment vehicle this year that we've seen is multi-state operators or MSOs, and the third largest investment vehicle that we've seen for some reason is cannabis cafes or marijuana lounges, even though it's not legal. The second investment vehicle is data, and the subset within that is technology and accurate dosing. And so the consistency is what people really want to ensure that they're going to have a consistent effect. And so with that, wondering, Bob, about improvements with overall issues in consuming edibles, utilizing nanotechnology to increase bioavailability to help speed up the onset of effects, with Canada again becoming legal with beverages and edibles between October and December. That's obviously going to be a big deal. So increasingly, consumers have questions about the food that they buy and eat. They're curious and better informed than ever. And so a study that conducted by the Hartman Group, 65% of Americans surveyed said companies earn consumer trust by being open about what's in their products, and 55% want specific details about how their products were made and who made them. So are you seeing improvements to help with the issues of overconsumption, the overdosing by taking one edible, not waiting long enough, and then taking another one? Do you think that the nanotechnology will help increase bioavailability to the blood-brain barrier to speed up the onset of effects?
There's a lot of questions in that question right there. I guess first I would address testing, right? Testing is still, in my opinion, not where it needs to be, right? We can't be consistent manufacturers unless we're getting consistent test results, right? So we're really only as good as our labs. As we're expanding nationally, right, we're seeing the same problems that we had in Colorado 6, 7, 8 years ago. There are just some inherent issues, I guess, with testing cannabis. So, I would like to point out that, until testing hits a standard, right, and until we get more consistent testing throughout the country and throughout the globe, that quote unquote consistency question is going to keep popping up, right? One of the things we did when we got into the industry 10 years ago is we tested the oil and we tested every finished product. That's now mandatory in the state of Colorado for every manufacturer. So, I think we're very good here in Colorado, and the rest of the country is getting better as their labs are getting better with making sure that the products are consistent. So, when we tell somebody it's 100 milligrams, it's 100 milligrams. And, nanotechnology is interesting, right? It's interesting technology, and we haven't seen a huge increase in overconsumption because of nanotechnology. Right? The nanotechnology, I think, from the research that we've done, it's kind of in your system faster and out of your system faster. Mm-hmm. With a traditional edible, where we see a lot of the uncomfortableness, is when you overconsume and it lasts for hours and hours, right? I think that gets a little bit, it gets a little bit trying, for the patient. So, it's something that we've addressed here in Colorado, I think 5 years ago now. We had when rec hit, we had a lot of people over consuming, and the industry took it upon themselves to create edibles education cards. And, we printed those out and we got them in the hands of every dispensary, and we helped train every bud tender who was working at the time to say the right things, because, at the time they were all coming from the medical side, and, you've got a bud tender telling someone new to cannabis that, it's 100 milligram bars. I can eat 100. You can probably eat 50, when in reality, you should probably be starting at about 5 milligrams, and you should wait for a good 2 hours to see how it affects you before you add any more cannabis into your system. So we've gotten that message out, year after year after year here in Colorado. And I think we've done a really good job at preventing overconsumption.
Yesterday, we had a podcast about concentrates, and Jim Macoso of Lucid had mentioned that it could be a dichotomy where if you consume edibles with nanotechnology, it's going to be stronger. But as long as you don't consume too much, because what people do is they'll eat and they'll wait 20 minutes and say, oh, nothing happened. And then they'll, eat another one, and that creates an overdose. We've seen a lot of that. But with the nanotechnology, it's going to be stronger and hit you faster. So it may, give you the heart palpitations because it's stronger, but it also might avoid overdosing by taking too much. So time will tell.
It's the same thing when you're talking about any controlled substance, right? You talk about alcohol. If you drink quickly, by the time you're starting to feel the effects, even if you stop, there might be alcohol in your stomach that hasn't been absorbed yet. So even after you stop drinking, you're still getting absorption into your bloodstream, which gets you drunker. So, you have the same issues with cannabis. That it's interesting because alcohol is just so innate, right, in our culture. Mm-hmm. It's trial and error as you're young, right? You grow up with it. You see the adults consuming alcohol, and you see the effects, and you see the reactions, and everybody steals from their parents' liquor cabinet and starts to experiment. And I'm sure everybody's gotten to that point where you get too drunk and you have a bad time and you pull back and you kind of find your limits. It's the same thing with cannabis, right? We're finding that out, right? We don't have a generation yet of children watching their parents responsibly consume cannabis, right, and learning the proper way to do it. But it's coming, right? Just like with alcohol, we're going to get there, and it's just going to be, as common as alcohol consumption eventually. And with that comes responsibility, and that all comes from education.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, as a follow-up, down in California, what are you seeing either on the ground or via Edibles List and Edibles Magazine? How are you seeing how brands are establishing trust right now with the recent legalization down there, and how they're differentiating themselves from the pack?
Well, it really depends on what it is, the product. If you're talking about edibles, we see a lot of legacy brands that sort of survived what we refer to here as the purge, which is December 31st, 2017, when everybody had to stop production as they got licensed. A lot of the smaller brands, which a lot of times were people's favorite brands, they didn't make it. They're either gone or they're struggling to try and survive right now. We've been able to bring a few legacy brands on now that we're licensed to manufacture and distribute here in California, which has been great. And people recognize those, they remember them, but it's not always what they remembered, because what they got before may have been anywhere from 300 to 1,000 milligrams, where now the cap is at 100 milligrams, it's 10 milligram servings, which, like Bob was saying, for people that are new is plenty. 10 milligrams is probably even too much in some cases. As we travel around, especially in California and Nevada, we've been talking to a lot of EMT drivers lately who say that it's completely regular for them to get calls from adult people between the ages of, let's say, 35 and 50 that are in the driver's seat of their car, trapped in their driveway, thinking that they're dying and wanting to go to the hospital, but they can't even drive because they ate a 20 milligram gummy that maybe a bud tender told them was a microdose, because it's only 20 milligrams. To the bud tender, that's not a lot. To this person who's never even smoked cannabis before, though, it's a whole lot. And if they're going to have a bad experience the first time, that's going to turn them off edibles forever. Because we talk to people every single day. They see where we work, they hear the name of the magazine, and they say, oh, I can't have edibles. And when they say that, they make it sound like they can't have any edibles. They can't have a 2 milligram gummy. They can't have a 1,000 milligram brownie. They're turned off edibles forever because they had one bad experience that probably was either because they were sold something too strong or a friend of theirs made something too strong at home. So as far as brand loyalty and establishing trust with people, the brands that do their best to educate the consumers are the ones that we're seeing build a lot of trust. If your product has a lot of information on it, if you have a website with a lot of information, educational tips and tricks and the history of edibles and cannabis, if you have videos about making recipes or just how to infuse or how to use, those are the kind of things, a lot of that's done through social media where the brand is engaging with the user to help educate them so that they have a safer, more pleasurable time using the product, especially if they're using it for some kind of healing purposes. So really being as informative as absolutely possible and then educating the consumers as much as you can, that's what we're seeing establishes trust the best. But getting the new brands out there is a challenge because there's still the gold standard of edibles that everybody recognizes all of the time because a lot didn't survive and a lot are new.
So the industry is new. It's incredibly volatile. It's hard to nail down. The moment you think you can start focusing on one thing, some crazy regulations come out of nowhere. And with that, Dan, I'm wondering about what advice you can give to companies in emerging cannabis markets on how to prepare for a volatile regulatory environment. Just this last fall in Washington State, our regulatory authority, the Liquor and Cannabis Board, tried to implement rule changes that would have affected over 70% of the edibles market by changing the shapes and colors of the edibles. And so that would have resulted in a higher compliance cost, probably lost market share, and they claim that it was for the children. And that's the same regulatory authority that has pink bubblegum vodka. So it's frustrating.
Hypocrisy at its finest.
Right. That is hypocrisy at its finest, Bob. So Dan, what advice can you give to companies in emerging cannabis markets on how to prepare for a volatile regulatory environment?
Well, number one is you have to be able or be prepared to turn on a dime and adjust. I think, my view might be tainted because I am from Washington. Bob's from Colorado, the first state to legalize. We're the second state. So we've gone through tremendous gyrations where the pendulum is obviously to the regulatory side and not even close to being a industry and regulatory combination. A couple of points I think I'd make is that number one is keep in mind as many of the legislatures in your state are not your friend. They do not want this to happen. They are anti-marijuana. They're still buying into the old BS government propaganda type stuff. So it's always going to be a rough ride to get items changed and perhaps negatively easier. I think the second thing to keep in mind is this is not about you and about social justice. This is about tax dollars. And so that's what they care about. So, you're always going to have to deal with heavy taxation. I mean, in Washington, standard retail prices are 3.5 times wholesale prices. That's because taxation is 40% of that retail price. And then I think another point, and you may not like this, Bob, but in the eyes of the feds, we are felon, and in the eyes of some of your neighbors and in the eyes of some of your legislators, they look at you as criminals. Again, they're indoctrinated, so you have that whole public safety concern, strong public safety, and I think we all who are in the business are all for public safety and all for adult use only. But there are people who are going to come into this industry and are going to exploit those, and that's going to cause problems and change for us all. You're mentioning Washington, and Washington's packaging rules change. It seems monthly to me, and they've just made another change, delayed it again. We've lost well over, well, close to $100,000 in our 5-year history in just packaging changes that are required by Washington alone, throwing away packaging. And so just be prepared for all that.
How do you prepare for that? You know, we face all the same issues, right? It is. I describe it to people as we're building the airplane while flying with both hands tied behind our backs, right? And we don't have proper business tools on top of that. And people honestly do not have any idea what they're about to face until they get here. And, you know, the hypocrisy around it, the emergency around it, the panic around it, everything about this industry, from the people you're allowed to buy from, the places you're allowed to put your money, the services you can have personally, life insurance, and, don't go out and try to refinance your house, because you're not going to be able to refinance your house. I was stating that I was just fired from my brokerage account. So you're in the cannabis industry, you're not allowed to trade stocks in America anymore. So that's coming down the pipeline. But, we've been fired from everybody, from our chocolate supplier to the people who bring our toilet paper. Right? And you look at these people and you look at these companies and you just shake your head. It's so commonplace now. I don't even get upset about it, right? You just water off your back and you just keep moving along, because it happens so often and it comes out of left field. And, I find it more amusing now than anything else, but you don't understand until you're eyeballs deep in it.
We had Best Buyers, who's a photographer as Cannabis on Instagram, who's had her account reactivated 9 times. Yeah. And so that's, loss of business and everything else. And then accounts are getting shut down left and right. You're just saying you got kicked out of your brokerage firm. People can't get bank accounts. When you're trying to just deal with employees, that can be hard enough. And when you can't even focus on that because you're dealing with packaging, at a cost of $25,000 a year or whatever, is a lot to deal with when you can't really reallocate your human capital because it's all tied up into some regulatory issue that is hot at the moment. It's tough. So I don't know.
When the state regulations changed that put the child resistance onto the manufacturer instead of at the dispensary level, we had $1 million increase in our packaging cost. Yeah, for 1 year.
Yeah, one thing
hard to swallow. Right?
One thing I want to emphasize on this, and Bob kind of brought it up, but as an entrepreneur, as you move into this in your state, be prepared to have your bank account shut down. Be prepared not to get a mortgage. Don't go apply for a second mortgage to finance it because you're not going to get it. Mm-hmm. Those are just standards. There is no banking, at least on any type of interstate level. And so just be prepared for that. That makes the capital acquisition and, of course, banking and cash management much more difficult. It's just one of the issues.
Yeah, my favorite story is I got a letter from my bank that I'd had for 30 years canceling my accounts. Yeah. Zero explanation. But at the bottom of the bank president's name was a paragraph this long that spelled out every reason why they couldn't discriminate against me. And cannabis isn't on that list, right? So
happened to me.
I look at that type of hypocrisy and go, okay, you were kind enough to tell me all the reasons you can't discriminate against me, but because I'm doing something that's legal in my state, right? And because you choose not to follow FinCEN guidelines, because you can, right? The banks can deal with us. They just have to follow FinCEN guidelines. They just choose not to. And it's just easier for them to turn a blind eye or claim that they can't, when in reality they can. They just don't want to do the work.
Yeah, they don't want to lose their banking charter or their credit union affiliate.
Well, they won't if they follow FinCEN guidelines, right? FinCEN has laid out the directive on how they can deal with the cannabis space. They just don't want to do it.
Right. Absolutely. So, Bob, how do you compete when seemingly you have only 3 hours in a single day of the week to make sales? Let me give you some data behind that. So in August of 2016, Headset reported that on Friday, 1 in 5 baskets contain edibles, a higher rate than any other day. Friday, between the hours of 3 and 5, accounted for 30% of the total basket volume in that month. Candy and chocolates were half of all the sales, and a little over half of those baskets consisted of only a single item. So now we're starting to see 1,500, 2,000 SKUs in these stores, and bud tenders are turning over, faster than a leaf. So how do you compete? How does a brand compete when seemingly you only have 3 hours on a single day of the week to make your sales?
That is the $1 million question right now. It's something that we're struggling with. Colorado seems to have a new edibles manufacturer every week, right? And because there is such saturation in this market, the only way they can get on the store shelves is to cut their cost, right? So people are buying their way onto the shelves, which puts pressure on established brands because now we're forced to remain competitive. So it's really driving the profits down, right? And then we're dealing with 280E, right? So you've got that tax headache on top of the fact that you've got shrinking profits, and it's difficult. And yeah, the fact that I had heard a stat that every 12 months, the average dispensary loses all of their employees, right? I think I was told like 3 months is kind of the average for a dispensary to keep a bud tender.
That's crazy.
Right. And if you look at that, it's an entry-level position, right? It's an entry-level position that's not a tax write-off, that's got to go to someone over the age of 21. Right, so these are minimum wage jobs for adults, basically, right? That's not a tax write-off for the business. So it's hard to pay more. It's hard to offer benefits because those are not tax write-offs. It's hard to do the right thing because we're struggling with 280E and the way we're taxed on a daily basis, right? My effective tax rate last year was 80%.
What?
Yeah, that's ridiculous, right? And that's what we're up against daily. And, the salaries, we've got the luxury of being able to write off cost of goods sold, which is still a small part, right, of what we're doing on a daily basis. So, we do have some tax write-offs, and with some tax write-offs, I still had an effective rate of 80%. So, it puts pressure on the entire system from top to bottom, right, when it comes to employees, when it comes to profitability of your products, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to, having to play, really the mature market game, which Colorado is now a mature market. Right? There was a time where if you were making products and you could fill orders, successfully, you found your way onto the shelves. But there is so much competition here, and there is an abundance of cannabis. So, we struggled for years just being able to find enough cannabis to keep up. It's no longer a problem in Colorado. So anybody can come in, anybody can get a license, anybody can buy oil cheaper than I can make it now, right? And they're putting subpar edibles on the shelves, and the only thing they have to sell is price because they don't have any brand loyalty. And that's the current situation in Colorado. And, coming up with solutions to combat that it seems like it's a daily fight.
It is interesting because Colorado is vertically integrated, so they have lower taxes and yet higher prices than what we've seen in Washington, where owners are separated by law. So retail owners are separate from the producer processors, and yet we have a higher tax and a lower cost of product.
We're separated here.
All right.
Yeah. You can have standalone grows, you can have standalone MIPS, you can have standalone dispensaries.
That's
on the rec side, right? But even on the med side now, we're trying to mirror the med and the rec sides a little bit closer. So, I think they've moved off of patient counts now for medical grows. So there was a little bit of a shortage for medical product, and a lot of people moved out of the medical markets because there was such an abundance in the rec market. But some of that stuff should be shifting. There's taxes, right, in between those levels, but you've got massive grows here in Colorado that aren't attached to a MIP or a dispensary. And, 5 years ago, they were knocking on my door and saying, hey, I'm building a 100,000 square foot greenhouse. And I'm like, okay, and then what? Well, then I'm going to sell you my cannabis. I'm like, you're not going to sell it to me. I might buy your trim, but I'm not going to buy your cannabis at $2,500 a pound, right? And every dispensary had their own grow, right? So, and you know, nobody really wanted to buy this cannabis because, you know, there was a lot of people who didn't know what they were doing. They were coming into the market, they started growing cannabis that wasn't very good, and then they couldn't sell it. So, you know, all of a sudden everybody got a MIP license and everybody started extracting, and now it's just, you know, they're just dumping oil onto the market because that's their only outlet and everybody's trying to keep the doors open.
Right. To clarify though, in California and Colorado, you have an option to be a producer or processor or retailer or all three. Whereas in Washington, you don't have that choice. You can't own from seed to sale, which makes it incredibly competitive. And that was going to be my point, is that
got it.
Washington is really, really competitive because you don't have the same people growing and selling.
Sure.
And so with,
I would think, I don't know, from my standpoint, it might make things easier, right? Because everybody's on a level playing field there, right? You're not having that issue in Colorado. Would you say that's correct?
I'd say it's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I think overall having the ability to be in retail is certainly a plus because of the margin there. You look at that, but and we can't have any ownership, any cross ownership. Even our investors can't be crossed over, and I think that's a real limitation, quite frankly. I think you know, I think Washington's behind the times in a lot of that. However, long-term wise, I don't think vertical integration is a winner.
No.
I mean, it's, you know, you're going to have your farmers, you're going to have your producers, and you're going to have your retailers. And the key to me, and I think Bob, you probably agree with this, the number one that is really going to have the main strength is the producer, the converter of the product, not the farmer and not the retailer. Right now, the retailers are
follow normal industries, right? You know, it's interesting when, you know, especially on like a regulatory level, you know, when you're going and you're trying to talk to regulators about cannabis, and they expect you all to have the same goal, to all have kind of the same mindset. And it's not. It's agriculture, it's, you know, it's extraction, it's technology, it's mass production of food products, and it's retail, right? You don't ask the alcohol industry to speak with one voice, right? The people who grow the hops are different than the people who are at the breweries, who are different than the people who are distributing, and they're different than the people who are at the liquor store, right? But, you know, for some reason, we're expected to have one voice because we're all cannabis. And it just doesn't work that way. You know, it's eventually going to go the way of normal industry where, you know, you're going to have, cannabis is going to be a commodity at some point, right? The walls are going to come down, and I'm going to be buying stuff from Oregon. I'm going to be shipping 5-gallon buckets of oil from wherever into my production facility, you know, so I can manufacture products here, and then I can finally, you know, automate, right? Once I can ship over state lines, I can actually become a real business, right? And go out and get a loan and justify a $500,000 piece of equipment. Because if I bought that now, it would be on for 4 days a month, right? I would make all the products I need for Colorado in a few days, and that piece of equipment would just sit there idle, right? So, but eventually we will become a real industry, right? And be able to ship over state lines and be able to have, you know, the tools that other industries have, right? And we can start becoming more efficient, and we can really start to drive the cost down. You know, I tell regulators all the time, my competition is the black market. It's not the licensee down the street, right? I need to be competitive with the guy on Craigslist selling a 300 milligram edibles for half the price of my 100 milligram edibles at retail, right? So it seems counterintuitive to them, but the reason you don't make alcohol at your house is because you can walk down the street and get any flavor, any size, any potency you want at any time for cheap, right? There is no incentive to have a black market alcohol, you know, market, right? It's not there because the incentive isn't there. Until we get that way with cannabis, right? Until you take that financial incentive away from the black market, we're going to continue to lose as a licensed regulated entity.
So here's a follow-up question. I guess I'll start with Patrick in California. We've seen a lot of convenience. Zoots drops and Zoots mints are awesome convenience. I really like the Incredible Bar. Reminds me of like a power bar, grab and go, very convenient, kind of like a pre-roll. But I'm wondering about more of like a healthy, active cannabis lifestyle. So that's why I kind of go to you, Patrick, first. You're in the sunny state of California, a lot of activity down there. And so I'm wondering, you know, as we talk about some of the medicinal benefits of rehabilitating from injuries or recovering from an intensive interval training, HIIT exercise, CrossFit, whatever, what are some of the essential components in the cannabis-infused foods that provide an ability to live an active cannabis lifestyle?
Well, that goes into, excuse me, like the whole reason that Edibles List was originally created 10 years ago, before it was even a magazine, was because there was no way online to source dietary specific healthy edibles. And if you were looking for gluten-free or vegan or low sugar or no sugar, there was really no way to do that at the time because nothing was organized that way on the dispensary level. Weed Maps was still really doesn't, but it was new at the time. So that's kind of been something that we've been hyper aware of and working as much as we can to keep everybody aware of and promote as much as possible. I would say like the start of that is probably using edibles that have better and healthier ingredients in the first place, in an almost kind of preventative kind of a way. And we see more than we used to, but there is still an embarrassing lack of healthy edibles available for people because it is kind of the cheapest and the easiest way to do it is to make gummies or to make something that's high in sugar, that's low cost, that people are gonna buy a lot of. And gummies are an interesting example because you don't see 30-year-old, 40-year-old adults eating an entire bag of gummies when they're not infused, unless maybe they're at a movie or something. Buying a bag of gummies isn't something that really started to seem habitual until you put THC in it. I mean, you see it a lot with CBD now, but it's still just such a cheap, easy way to infuse that kind of contributes to a lot of the popularity of it. As far as healthy edibles go, we are seeing a little bit more as far as puffed quinoa, people using brown rice syrup as a sweetener, foods that actually have healthy nutritional or even medicinal benefits in the first place are a great way to start. A lot of the nano-emulsified stuff that everybody was talking about earlier is also a popular thing with athletes because it does make it easier to infuse things like vitamin water. It does make it easier to infuse things that are specifically created to hydrate after a workout or to reoxygenate your cells after you've been running or doing CrossFit or making up for any kind of the water that you lose doing Bikram hot yoga. In LA, especially, I think not only in California, but probably in Southern California. And then there's a real high concentration of, you know, healthy, active lifestyle people here in Los Angeles. And it is another one of the things that we get asked about the most. People want edibles, especially people who are new to cannabis, who don't have a background in smoking cannabis or cigarettes or anything else. Smoking is a very strange thing to get into for the first time when you're 45 years old, if you've never done it before. And vaping, even though it's getting very, very popular, that's another thing that you have to be really careful about because it's easy to cut vapes with something that's dangerous, but that still technically is going to pass the tests for pesticides, microbials, heavy metals, whatever else. It still might be something that you could get lipid pneumonia from if you inhale it because it was never meant to be in the lungs. Even if in food, that's a healthy thing, like coconut oil. People are still cutting vapes with coconut oil, but coconut's very bad to breathe, as healthy as it might be for whatever else.
Following up with that, there's been a lot of M&As that we've seen. Molson Coors Brewing, joint venture with Quebec-based Hexco. Canopy Growth hired Martha Stewart for CBD edibles. Constellation Brands and Canopy Growth had a $4 billion investment. Anheuser-Busch and Tilray got in the game. They're all looking at CBD beverages. And so, Patrick, are you seeing
firing any of those people?
Yeah, they did. Canopy got the CEO got fired because he put a lot of good deals together, but none of those deals generated revenue.
Not the company, the clearinghouse for their stocks, right? Yeah, that's what I want to see.
Right.
It's a little bit facetious, but correct.
So, Patrick, you're down in California. We saw about 5% less capital investment than other legal states, and I think that's obviously because people wanted to be on the sidelines until like recently. Right now, there's still some temporary licenses versus permanent licensing, and so it's kind of interesting. I'm wondering if Patrick, you're seeing more Canadian capital or U.S.-based companies expanding?
Definitely Canadian. I feel like somebody calls me about it every single day. It's where we're seeing, I mean, personally, I'm seeing more Canadian money entering the equation than anything else. I mean, mostly because they're allowed to, and there's a lot of Canadian holding companies that want to invest. There's a lot of Canadian companies that want to buy up as much as they can down here and then trade it in Toronto, even though you can't here because it's legal to do it there. It's becoming, I mean, something that we hear about every single place that we go. We were just at the National Cannabis Industry Association in San Jose. Half of the investors I talked to were probably Canadian. We immediately went to the Cannabis Drinks Expo in San Francisco. Again, it was, at that one, it was probably more Canadian investors than anything else. And then even in Miami, we went down there for the USA CBD Expo last week. And again, there we talked to more Canadian holding corporations and Canadian investment groups and Canadian investment advisors than anything else. I really started to wonder about that myself about a year ago because we were getting so many calls from there, and then the more we learned about it, the more sense it made. I don't know that it's necessarily more in California just because I haven't, I mean, Bob might know more as far as Colorado goes, but everywhere that we go, we are approached by Canadian investment groups wanting to get into the game or wanting to expand the game and wanting to buy up as many aspects of it as they can. They want to get into extraction. They want to get into technology. They wanted to get into anything ancillary. But because they can invest in THC and CBD in every single state if they want to, and then take all that money back to Canada, it's such a popular option that we don't have the ability to do here. And it seems like it's just growing and growing, and that's happening more and more every single day. I already talked to somebody else about it today. Somebody called wanting to know if we'd like to do a conference call, talk to some Canadian investors. Do we have anything to send their way? Can we recommend any buys for them? Is anybody that we know looking to sell? And it's just exponentially becoming more and more.
I'm definitely seeing a lot of Canadian companies coming down into the U.S. via California and wanting to file U.S.-based over-the-counter OTC IPOs. And so it's very interesting that they're definitely coming by the droves right now. Dan, what are you seeing? Is it more U.S.-based or Canadian?
Well, it's all Canadian, realistically. Just because they can raise capital from around the world and invest. Canada is perhaps the market size of California. The United States is, the market to be in. And so they have the real edge right now in coming down with capital. I mean, we talk to every once in a while some private family firms, private capital in the States, but by far, most of the conversations, 90% of them Canadian.
Bob, what are you seeing?
A little bit of both, right? there are multi-state operators here that are, publicly traded on the CSE, right? So it's kind of a mix, right? Do I consider them Canadian companies? No, but they're traded on the CSE, right? Even though they're stationed here in the U.S. So, Colorado is just getting to the point where we've changed some rules and regulations around investment dollars here, which I think will help open up the Colorado market. Kind of similar to Washington. When the regulators put the rules in place way back when, almost 10 years ago, we were the first, so we were kind of over-regulated, right? They were so concerned about illegal money flooding into this market that they made it virtually impossible to get any money. And we've been struggling with that for 10 years now. So that is going to change here at the end of 2019 in Colorado. We've put some rules in place where we can now start to look at taking institutional money, going public, rolling up under public companies. So I definitely think that's going to help us as a state, right? It's been difficult. And I tell people it's this weird kind of inverse relationship. The bigger you get, the less you have, right? And it's harder and harder and harder to keep feeding the beast, because we're still growing, and it's so hard to expand here in the state and expand nationally without access to capital. It's probably one of the most difficult things we've faced, and we're finally getting an opportunity to address it.
I want you to unpack that in just a moment about the access to capital if or when the States Act is passed. But before we get to that, I kind of want to talk to you about your expansion plans and what you're doing. I've always said that you can operate anywhere in the world, but you might want to look at having your headquarters in Canada so that you can file an IPO or RTO, but at least having an entity in Puerto Rico. Being a U.S. protected territory, Puerto Ricans are Americans, but they don't have congressional representation. And you remember in school, you can't have taxation without representation, which makes Puerto Rico the best place in the world for American CBD companies specifically, because there's a 4% corporate tax cap, a 50% tax credit, and in some cases, 100% tax deduction. Yeah. So in my opinion, those CBD, mom and pop brands will not be around unless they're in Puerto Rico taking advantage of those opportunities. And so I'm wondering if you're seeing an influx in companies looking at the benefits of having an entity in Puerto Rico utilizing Act 20, Act 22, Act 73, or Act 74.
Yeah, we're in the process of looking at it now, because just what you said, 4%. And if you remember, I paid 80% last year. So, I do have a CBD company as well. The rules are you have to have somebody down there for, I think, 161 days out of the year. We've been strongly considering it. And now that we're actually open down in the Puerto Rican market, it's kind of raised its head again. There are some ways, right? There are some ways to put yourself in more favorable tax positions, and we're exploring all of those.
Neither of us are accountants, but if you were to go down there, you'd be a lot more tan, presumably. But would you be saving 76%?
No. Here's the catch, right? To get that money back into the U.S., you still have to pay taxes. Right? So if you leave it down there, you can see that 4% tax rate. But I believe once you try to move it back into the U.S., I think that's a taxable event from what we're being told.
I don't think that's accurate. I think that no matter where you move to, that tax, you're not taxed in Puerto Rico. So if you work in North Korea, you work in Iran, you work in Cuba, you're going to be taxed no matter what. If you work in Puerto Rico, that's tax free. No American can be taxed working in Puerto Rico, even if you leave.
No, but if we tried to transfer from a Puerto Rican bank account into a U.S. bank account,
right?
We were told that was a taxable event at that point.
Interesting. Okay, we need to look into that a little bit further, though. I'm glad I brought that up.
Yeah, let me know. If you find out different information, I'd love to hear it.
100%. Next month, as a matter of fact, we're going to be doing our monthly podcast on the advantages of doing business in Puerto Rico. So I will definitely let you know.
Please.
So Bob, what services do you want to outsource? I mean, I think, Canada is looking to be a pretty good international opportunity. I think Colombia is poised to be like the big box store of concentrates. And so which large scale investments will you see in the future? You mentioned automation and some other things. Wondering how much real capital is necessary to generate first sales in that event. So what do you see outsourcing? What do you need to do?
Because of the situation that we're in, right, we have really kind of switched our focus to mostly licensing deals everywhere, right? So, my focus has really been to find operators in other states, other countries, where we can license the brands for national expansion. That's just kind of been our mindset because we really haven't had, you said, access to institutional money. I think our mindset is going to shift here, right? People ask me all the time, well, don't you want to own a license in other states? Well, yeah, but they don't understand the costs behind that statement, right? And as you're still expanding exponentially in Colorado, and you're trying to expand into multi-states, right? To try to find that capital from somewhere to help you actually own a license and build an infrastructure, it's virtually impossible, right? I mean, we found it to be impossible. I know some people have found ways to do it, but for us, licensing deals have really been the way to go. But I'm talking to people in Colombia. We're talking to people in Canada. We're talking to people in Greece. We're talking to people in the special economic zone in Jamaica. We've got partners in Puerto Rico now. So we are far from finished growing. It's just trying to figure out the best way to do it in the confines of the rules we have to follow.
Anything to add to outsourcing?
Well, I think outsourcing, first of all, if you want to be multi-state, that's about the only way you can do it. The idea of building a factory in every state is economic suicide. And once deregulation happens, most of those factories just become anchors, just lost capital. But at the reverse side, it's also very difficult to find good manufacturers. The Western states are unique in the fact that they had a ganja culture. They had this before. You go east of the Rockies, and there is no ganja culture. There is no basis there. So your licensing deal really ends up tying in with big money and that have gotten the licenses and have the backing, and you end up being really the operator in a lot of ways, although they put up all the money, all the funds. And we've done that. That's what we've done in just recently in Illinois and Massachusetts also. And it works, but it's still a lot of work. I mean, you really have to babysit. So it's more work than I think we anticipated. I'd much rather manufacture and own my own license in every state, but that's, as Bob says, that's just not practical. Just too much capital.
I've seen a lot of people utilize strategic partnerships, but Canadians, for whatever reason, they love to have their own exclusivity, their own IP. They want 51% ownership to put it on the books. So different cultures, different strategies. But transitioning into, the future and what that might look like, there's an interesting list of opportunities in the general sector. And I kind of want to run through some of these opportunities that might bleed into the cannabis world and check to see how that relates to where you see the cannabis industry moving forward. So the question is, what's in store for the future of edible products as we're seeing new things come on board? I'm always taking a look at new, neat, niche stuff. So whether it's cooperative packaging solutions or modular factories, mobile pack houses, improved traceability technology, farm-to-fork virtual marketplaces, or behavioral economics for agriculture. There's a lot of cool stuff on the horizon. And so starting with Patrick, what's in store for the future of edible products? I know that in California, popular strains take about 6 months to hit Colorado, and then about another 6 months before they're popular in Washington. So maybe, we could say that California leads the trends. What are you seeing, Patrick, in store for the future of edible products?
I think on the simple side of things, dietary specific healthy things like we were talking about earlier are probably some of the same trends that you see in regular food is always some of the same trends that you're going to see in cannabis infused food. So things that are made vegan, things that are kosher, things that are gluten-free, things that are sugar-free or super low sugar. Those are kind of the simple trends that we anticipate just getting more and more and more popular. But like you said, anybody that can offer a farm to table, or let's say farm to dispensary counter experience where the end user or the end consumer can actually look at the journey that this went on from when it was a seed to when it was a plant to when it got harvested until it was turned into whatever is going to be used to infuse the food. And if they can do the same thing with the ingredients of the food and know that everything is organic and cruelty-free and fair trade, the same kind of ideals that are informing people's eating habits are kind of informing a lot of their cannabis consumption habits or philosophies as well. So those things for sure. And then everything that you talked about earlier with nanotechnology, emulsification, and infusion as well, just because the bioavailability is going to be higher. That's a word that most consumers are only just now hearing for the very first time, and what it means, what it might possibly mean to them. So the other thing is low dose, of course, is more popular than ever. It used to be something people really complained about. But now microdosing is something that continues to get more and more popular all the time, especially with new users or people who need something working for them all day long, not just at the end of the day or right before bed, but need to start the moment that they wake up and then throughout the day. So microdosing, healthy, dietary specific things with a higher bioavailability. Those are the immediate trends that we see getting more and more popular for 2019, 2020, and where it's going. Past that, probably just all of the newer technologies and ways of extracting and infusing that we're seeing enter the market for the very first time now, especially as people become more and more aware of it. Because, like we said, I mean, most people out there, when you say the word edible, they are still wondering, do you mean a pot brownie? Is what I get asked more than anything else. Now, maybe they might say, are those gummies Dr. Phil talks about? We hear a lot of people referencing Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz. So that's still where a lot of people are getting their information. Outside of California, Colorado, probably Washington and Oregon too. When you guys travel, you might see this. I'm from Oklahoma, born and raised in Oklahoma. So when I go to Oklahoma for a cannabis event, it kind of feels like I have traveled back in time 20 years. And that I'm talking to people who may have never heard of a lot of the things that we talk about now. When I talked about cannabis vapes, they asked if that was an e-cigarette with weed in it, which technically it is, but the fact that none of the people that I was talking about who were growers in the industry and at a cannabis event had heard of a lot of even the distillation or extraction techniques that we talk about in much more compliant states with a rich history of legalized cannabis. They're only hearing about that for the first time. So what I see is the trends in somewhere like Los Angeles or San Francisco really might not be the trend somewhere like Tulsa, Oklahoma for another 5 to 7 years. So even trending wise, I think we still have to look at it as kind of a state by state or at least area by area basis.
Well, your future sounds delicious. So thank you. Dan, what do you see in store for the future of edible products?
Well, first of all, I see a really good market growth. One of our focuses, because we are more in the microdosing side, it's been the 40 plus, the senior set. I would say overall, product-wise, I mean, I think certainly bioavailability and trying to create more of a social type experience where, you can get a little buzz and it's more effective and sooner, just like a beer or something like that. You're not getting over consuming, you're doing it in a natural conversation way. We see that as being big. I think CBD combinations, especially with a little bit of THC, which we think is by far the best combination, are going to be really big. The self-medication, again, we can't make any claims, but there are, you can just go on the internet and find a whole lot of testimonials. And I think a lot of people are going to move in more and more into that. And I think, again, that's the elder set that we're looking at, for anything from topicals for arthritis to, a little bit of cannabis and CBD for migraines. It expands the whole thing. Sleep, of course. We're fond of saying, products will evolve and develop, and we're fond of saying that, anything that isn't produce or fresh protein, we can make infused. And then the consumer is going to eventually settle on what is the best element. And we're not trying to create a dessert. We're just trying to create a nice little package in which it's an enjoyable consumption, an enjoyable experience throughout the whole basis.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that the number one demographic is white women 50 and over as a number one purchaser for pre-rolls. I was also surprised by the 15% market share of topicals and tinctures. It's no surprise that suppositories aren't selling well. Nobody wants to buy that from a kid at a dispensary. But if you have a vending machine, I think you're going to start to see a lot more sales. And so maybe with the addition of vending machines, we'll see more purchasing in that baby boomer generation for topicals and tinctures. Once they get acclimated to that, they'll definitely try the edibles. And so I would agree that that's a huge market that's not being really utilized. The education is huge. When I approached an adult retirement community, the director was very, very interested in having a CBD educational course. So then I got a gal that is licensed to do massage, and she's here locally and is well known. And she was excited, started talking about cannabis. And then the director of this adult housing unit said, I would never introduce my people to cannabis. That would be irresponsible. And so the education needs to be there because we're all on the same page talking in different languages, essentially.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. I think from suppositories, we do suppositories here. We give most of them away, right? I mean, typically when you find the patient who needs a suppository, they're in pretty bad shape. Yeah. Right. So it's not something that you sell a lot of, but it is a product that we make a lot of. I think it's going to be, a pretty long path, but people are going to realize eventually that it is a pretty effective way to consume your cannabinoids, right? Especially if you need high milligrams. So.
High milligrams, prostate cancers, colon cancer, those type of elements that seem to have helped quite a bit.
Yeah,
it's not a popular retail item.
No, we've got a patient here and had prostate cancer and some tumors on their spine, and started them with just a super high CBD tincture and high THC suppositories. Within the first 3 months, PSA levels went from 406 down to 1.9.
What?
Tumors are almost half the size in the first 3 months, to the point where the doctors don't even want to do any more body scans because their blood work is so good. Blood work now is at 0.3. So, PSA levels are at 0.3, and they're like looking at the blood levels going, if we didn't know you had cancer, we wouldn't think you had cancer, right? So, so we've seen results like that, and those are always just reinforces my understanding that cannabis is one of the most therapeutic plants on the planet, right? And everybody's got a need for it, right? It's just how, right? What your delivery method is, what your ratios are, whether you're doing it for health issues, whether you're doing it as a supplement, right? I mean, I take very low doses of cannabinoids on a daily basis. Other people need 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day. And, you know, we've got patients everywhere in between. So that's been kind of the fun part of the industry, is just watching so many people get here and find relief somehow, right? Whether it's 1 milligram of THC a day or 1,000 milligrams of THC a day, we hear success stories day after day after day. And, you know, that's really what keeps me going. It's, you know, that's why I got into the industry. It helped my grandmother, and I watched it help her towards the end of her life. And, you know, every day I get that email or get that phone call or, you know, see that Facebook post of somebody finding relief from cannabinoids. You know, it just reignites the fire.
Yeah, I think, Bob, you hit it right on the head when you said that everybody has a need and everybody can consume this product, and it'll help them. I'm talking about not only people that have serious medical conditions, but even lightweight conditions, even temporary stress, sleep, just relaxation. In today's world, which is a very high stress environment, I mean, I've often said that I think we can replace every bit of antidepressants that are out there in a safe way and in a fun way, in a relaxing way. So everybody, our potential market is everybody, not just the people who have tried before. As this grows, it's going to be, I think everybody will be using it in some form or another.
I think what I heard this from a doctor, the average person in the US takes 14 pills a day. 14. So, you know, there's a lot of people who don't take any, which means the people who are taking pills are up in the 20s, right? So everybody seems to be consuming a pill for something. And, you know, cannabis can probably help a number of those ailments.
I think we're going to see a lot of microdosing as people kind of just take it instead of maybe one aspirin or whatever. They'll just take a microdose, 5 milligrams. I tend to take a 1-to-1 CBD to THC ratio. Dan had mentioned that that's a good ratio. I found that in 2015, and it made me remember what Blue Dream used to be before it had all this pinene in it. It was this euphoric, energetic, uplifting effect. And that 1-to-1 CBD to THC ratio is phenomenal. I tend to take more of a 20-to-1 now. That's my microdose. That's what I do when I'm on a panel, speaking in front of a group. If I have anxiety, whatever, 20-to-1 is great for that microdose. And then the 1-to-1 is my go-to. That's kind of my hybrid when people are looking for a sativa-like effect or an indica-like effect. That combination for me is a 1-to-1 CBD to THC ratio. I think that'll be all the rage. Time will tell.
No, it's funny. We have those products, right? We have a 1 milligram THC, 10 milligram tart, and a gummy, and a chocolate bar. You know, they're still kind of low on the sales side, but that momentum is growing, right? And I think what we've seen and what you're going to see in every state is probably what we saw here in Colorado, and I'm sure what you saw in Washington, where, you know, as soon as cannabis becomes legal, it's just a rush to consume as much as you can, right? Right? It's like prohibition's ended. And eventually the pendulum swings back to, okay, I can't keep consuming that much cannabis on a daily basis, right? And they pull back and realize, you know, 1 to 3 to 5 milligrams a day and some CBD, those are all good levels, right? You know, and we're seeing it here in Colorado, you know, and as the new states emerge, I'm sure it's going to be the same thing, right? It's the highest milligram you can get me, right, is kind of how it came out of the gates, right? And we still, you know, I still have 1,000 milligram products on the medical side here, but, you know, the 1 milligram products on the rec side are really starting to pick up some steam, and they're really starting to grow.
You know, it's funny you brought up the suppositories at the end. I feel like that feeds back slightly into the question you asked about what athletes are doing earlier. Because the one time that I tried some high-dose suppositories, which was really just to write a review on them, I also had to participate in a bowling tournament that day, like a cannabis industry bowling tournament, which I had forgotten about when I used the suppositories. Edibles Magazine won that bowling tournament. I had the highest score out of any individual player in the entire tournament. And some of those shops had ringers. They brought their security guards that had their own bowling ball, shoes, special gloves, like guys who really took it seriously. And I hadn't bowled in about 7 years at the time. So there's a chance that they're slightly performance enhancing.
Well, maybe we should market towards the bowling market now. I'm thinking this is going to change my whole strategy.
Wait, can I make a bowling ball shape now? Is that what I can do? I think it's going to be more uncomfortable. I don't know.
But I will tell you, normally, if I was in a bowling alley for 3 hours, I would be wanting to go outside and smoke. I did not even think about it. It didn't occur to me. I wasn't thinking I needed to smoke or that I felt low on THC. So I'm a fan of them. I think more people should try them. I need use of it, but I definitely recommend them, especially if you know that you're going to be, I don't know, trapped on a plane or trapped in a bowling alley or on a really long drive. But as with everything else, know your dose. I'm sure it'd be easy for those to hit the wrong people way too hard.
So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. I want to thank my guests. We have Bob Eschino with Incredibles. Also remotely is Patrick Ian Moore with Edibles List and Edibles Magazine. And also here is Dan Devlin with Zoots. Congratulations on the recent acquisition, by the way.
Thanks a lot for having us on and ability to talk about what we love, edibles.
So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.